Major Ava Remy stood at the edge of the flight simulation room, watching 23-year-old Lieutenant Marcus Webb execute what he considered a flawless landing sequence. The cockpit simulator hummed with the latest technology, holographic. Displays dancing across multiple screens while Webb's confident voice filled the room. Perfect approach. Clean landing. Time to beat. 4 minutes, 12 seconds, Webb announced, stepping out of the simulator with the swagger that only came with youth and inexperience. At 39, Ava had seen that swagger before. She'd worn it herself once, back when she believed technology and training manuals could solve everything, before Operation Valkyrie, before she learned that some lessons could only be taught by surviving what others didn't. "Not bad, Lieutenant," Ava said, her voice steady but distant. "But what happens when your instruments fail at 8,000 feet in a lightning storm?" Webb exchanged a glance with his squadron mates, barely concealing a smirk. "Ma'am, with respect, modern aircraft don't fail like that anymore. The Falcon 15s have triple redundancy systems. Everything's backed up." Ava nodded slowly, her weathered hands clasped behind her back. She'd heard variations of this speech for 3 years now, ever since Colonel Harrison had promoted her from active combat pilot to flight instructor. The official report had been kind, exemplary service record, transitioning to educational leadership role. The unofficial truth was simpler. After Valkyrie, nobody wanted the pilot who'd returned alone. "Run the simulation again," she said quietly. "This time, I want you to imagine your backup systems are down." "Ma'am, respectfully, when would that ever happen in real combat?" This came from Lieutenant Rodriguez, fresh from advanced flight school, his uniform still crisp with that new pilot sheen. The question hung in the air like smoke from a crashed aircraft. When would that happen? Ava's fingers unconsciously traced the small scar on her left temple, a souvenir from the day 17 of her squadron mates didn't come home. The day she'd navigated 40 miles through an electrical storm using nothing but a compass and dead reckoning because every piece of advanced technology in her cockpit had gone dark. "Just run it again," she said. After the session, Ava walked alone across the frost-covered tarmac of Blackfire Air Base. The December wind cut through her flight jacket, but she welcomed the cold. It kept her sharp, reminded her that comfort was a luxury pilots couldn't afford. Her footsteps echoed between the hangars until she reached Hangar 7, where her old aircraft waited. Falcon 12, tail number 447 Alpha. Compared to the sleek Falcon 15s the active pilots flew, her bird looked ancient, scarred hull, patched wing panels, and a cockpit that smelled like decades of jet fuel and determination. But she was still airworthy, still reliable, still the aircraft that had brought Ava home when nothing else could. Carved into the metal beside the cockpit, barely visible unless you knew where to look, were 4 words she'd etched with her own knife. No one left behind. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd left 17 behind in Valkyrie, but not by choice. Never by choice. Still talking to that old bird, Major? Ava turned to find Technical Sergeant David Martinez approaching, a coffee cup steaming in his hands. Martinez was one of the few people on base who'd been there before Valkyrie, who remembered when Major Ava Remy was the pilot everyone wanted on their wing. "She's good company," Ava replied. "Doesn't tell me I'm outdated." Martinez laughed, but it was hollow. "You know, I pulled the maintenance records on the new Falcon 15s yesterday. Beautiful machines, don't get me wrong. But in the past 6 months, we've had 14 system failures. Minor stuff mostly, but still. 14 failures in 6 months, Ava repeated. And how many on the 12s? 3. All weather-related, nothing catastrophic. Martinez took a sip of his coffee. Makes you wonder if newer is always better. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the morning sun paint the mountains in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere in those peaks was Dagger Canyon, a name that had been appearing more frequently in intelligence briefings lately. Hostile territory, the report said. High-value reconnaissance targets. You ever miss it? Martinez asked. Flying real missions, not just teaching kids how to read instrument panels? Ava was quiet for a long moment. The honest answer was complicated. She missed the clarity of combat missions, the simple equation of getting your people home alive. She missed being trusted with something that mattered. But she didn't miss the weight of command, the responsibility for other people's lives. Every day, she said finally. Martinez nodded, understanding. For what it's worth, Major, you must remember. Some of us know what you did out there. After he left, Ava climbed into her Falcon 12's cockpit. The seat molded to her body like an old glove, every switch and gauge exactly where her muscle memory expected them to be. She pulled out a small, dented metal box from beneath her seat. The same box she'd carried on every mission for the past 8 years. Inside was a hand-drawn map, ink-faded and edges worn soft from handling. The paper was stained with what looked like coffee but was actually hydraulic fluid from that terrible day in 2011. Actual grains of sand still clung to the corners, souvenirs from a desert that had claimed too many good pilots. The map showed the route she'd flown to escape Valkyrie, not the official flight plan, but the desperate, improvised path she'd taken when everything went wrong. When GPS failed, when radio contact died, when the storm turned their advanced navigation systems into expensive paperweights. This map had saved her life once. She had a feeling it might need to again. The morning briefing droned on with the usual routine. Weather reports, training schedules, maintenance updates. Ava sat in the back row, half listening while younger. Pilots discussed their latest simulations and theoretical scenarios. The confidence in their voices reminded her of herself at their age, back when she thought surviving flight school meant she was ready for anything. Major Remy, Colonel Harrison's voice cut through her thoughts. I assume you have nothing to add to today's tactical discussion. The question carried an edge, a subtle reminder of her place in the hierarchy. She was here to observe, to teach. Basic flight principles to cadets, not to contribute to real operational planning. No, sir, she replied evenly. Nothing to add. But as she looked around the room at the faces of pilots who'd never seen real combat, who'd never watched their instruments fail at the worst possible moment, who'd never had to choose between following orders and bringing their people home alive, Ava realized she had everything to add. They just weren't ready to listen. Not yet. The emergency klaxon shattered the morning quiet at 0600 hours sharp. Ava bolted upright in her quarters, instincts honed by years of combat operations kicking in before she was fully awake. Within 90 seconds, she was dressed and heading toward the command center, muscle memory guiding her through the corridors of Blackfire Base. The scene in the command center was controlled chaos. Officers moved with practiced urgency between banks of monitors and communication stations. At the center of it all stood Colonel Harrison, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, reviewing what appeared to be mission parameters. On a large tactical display, Reconnaissance Team Bravo 7 is missing, Lieutenant Colonel Janet Walsh announced to the assembled pilots. Last contact was 36 hours ago, deep in Dagger Canyon. Intel suggests they've been compromised and are trapped in hostile territory. Ava felt her pulse quicken. Dagger Canyon was nightmare terrain, jagged peaks, unpredictable weather patterns, and enough electronic interference to turn the most advanced navigation systems into expensive decorations. She'd studied those mountains extensively after Operation Valkyrie, recognizing the similarities to the terrain that had nearly killed her. This is a volunteer mission only, Colonel Harrison continued. his voice carrying the weight of command. High-risk extraction from a no-fly zone. We need 10 pilots for a coordinated rescue operation. Hands shot up around the room. Lieutenant Webb, Lieutenant Rodriguez, and 7 other pilots from the elite Falcon 15 squadrons volunteered immediately. These were the base's golden boys, the ones with perfect simulation scores and immaculate service records unblemished by failure. Ava raised her hand. The room fell silent. For a moment, she could hear nothing but the hum of electronic equipment and the distant sound of aircraft engines warming up on the tarmac. Major Remy, Colonel Harrison said, his tone carefully neutral. I'm sure your instructional expertise would be valuable, but this mission requires pilots with current operational experience. Sir, I have 28 successful combat missions logged, including 3 high-risk extractions in similar terrain, Ava replied, keeping her voice professional. Despite the implied dismissal, Lieutenant Webb cleared his throat. With respect, Major, those missions were years ago. This operation requires familiarity with current tactical systems and modern aircraft capabilities. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the younger pilots. To them, her experience was ancient. History, irrelevant in an age of computer-assisted targeting and GPS-guided precision strikes. The mission parameters are set, Colonel Harrison said with finality. Falcon 15 Squadron will handle the extraction. Major Remy, perhaps you could assist with pre-flight briefings for the volunteers. Dismissed. Again. Relegated to supporting. Roll while pilots half her age prepared to fly into territory that had nearly killed her once before. But as she turned to leave, something caught her attention. On the tactical display, the proposed flight path cut straight through Sector 7, a region marked in yellow for caution, variable weather conditions. To the young pilots, it probably looked like the most direct route. To Ava, who had memorized every wind pattern and pressure system in those mountains, it looked like suicide. Sir, she said, stepping back toward the display. The flight path through Sector 7. Current meteorological data shows a massive low-pressure system moving through that region. It would be safer to... Major, Colonel Harrison interrupted, not looking up from his paperwork. The mission has been planned by our best tactical analysts using the most current intelligence available. I'm confident these pilots can handle any weather they encounter. The dismissal stung, but it wasn't the words that bothered Ava. It was the absolute certainty in Harrison's voice. The same certainty she'd heard before Operation Valkyrie, when her concerns about equipment failures had been waved away as unnecessary pessimism. After the briefing, she lingered in the hallway, watching the chosen pilots file past toward the preparation rooms. Their confidence was infectious, their camaraderie obvious. They moved like a team that had trained together, fought together, trusted each other completely. She'd had that once. Before Valkyrie. Major Remy? Ava turned to find Captain Lisa Parker, one of the base's intelligence officers, approaching, with a thick folder in her hands. Parker was in her early 30s, career military, with sharp eyes that missed very little. Captain, I was reviewing the mission files, and I noticed something interesting. Parker opened the folder, revealing what appeared to be classification records. Your security clearance is still active at the T1 level. Ava raised an eyebrow. T1 clearance was reserved for pilots who had proven themselves capable of operating independently in the highest risk scenarios. She'd earned it after her third successful solo extraction mission, back when the military still trusted her judgment. That's unusual, Parker continued. Most instructors have their operational clearances downgraded, but yours was specifically maintained by order of Pentagon Command. I wasn't aware of that. Parker's expression grew serious. I pulled your complete service record, Major. Operation Valkyrie, 2011. You were the only pilot who successfully extracted survivors from a Level 4 Artillery Zone, using manual navigation after complete electronic failure. The memories came flooding back. The screaming wind, the dead instruments, the weight of 6 wounded soldiers in her cargo bay while she flew blind through a storm that meteorology had said was impossible. The 3 she couldn't save haunted her dreams, but the 6 who made it home had families who would never know her name. That was a long time ago, Captain. Was it? Parker pulled out another document. Because according to this morning's weather analysis, the system moving through Sector 7 has the exact same characteristics as the storm that hit your squadron in Valkyrie. Same pressure gradients, same electrical interference patterns, same potential for complete instrumentation failure. Ava stared at the meteorological data, her blood running cold. The numbers were eerily familiar. Barometric pressure dropping at rates that would make modern aircraft computers struggle to compensate. Electromagnetic interference levels that could turn sophisticated guidance systems into dead weight. Have you shared this analysis with Colonel Harrison? Parker's expression told her everything. I tried. He said the new Falcon 15s are designed to handle any weather conditions we might encounter. He's confident in the technology. Technology. Always the answer, until it wasn't. That evening, Ava found herself in Hangar 7 again, sitting in her Falcon 12's cockpit with her old metal box open beside her. The hand-drawn map seemed to glow in the dim light, its faded ink holding secrets that no computer database contained. She traced the route with her finger, not the direct path that looked logical on paper, but the winding, seemingly inefficient course that had brought her home when GPS satellites couldn't penetrate the storm. Interference. A path that avoided the worst pressure systems that used mountain updrafts instead of fighting them. That treated the weather as an ally instead of an obstacle to overcome. Her radio crackled to life. Major Remy, this is Control. Please report to Colonel Harrison's office immediately. Ava closed the map carefully, locked the metal box, and climbed out of her aircraft. Whatever Harrison wanted at this hour, it couldn't be good news. The colonel's office was spartanly decorated, military regulations, commendation certificates, and a single photo of him shaking hands with a Pentagon official. Harrison sat behind his desk, reading from a tablet with the kind of expression that suggested he was delivering bad news. Major, I'll be direct. There have been some concerns raised about your suitability for continued service in an instructional capacity. Ava remained standing at attention. What kind of concerns, sir? Some of the younger pilots have mentioned that your teaching methods are outdated, that you focus too heavily on manual navigation and emergency procedures instead of helping them master the advanced systems they'll actually use in combat. Translation. She was teaching them to think for themselves instead of trusting blindly in technology. Sir, I believe a comprehensive understanding of both modern and traditional navigation methods. Major. Harrison interrupted. The military has evolved. We don't fly by compass and instinct anymore. These pilots need to learn systems integration, computer-assisted targeting, GPS-coordinated formation flying. What they don't need is someone filling their heads with ghost stories about the old days. Ghost stories. Her 17 dead squadron mates had become ghost stories. I understand. Sir, I'll adjust my curriculum accordingly. Harrison nodded, seemingly satisfied. Good. Now, about tomorrow's mission. I want you to understand that your exclusion isn't personal. It's simply that we need pilots who are current on operational procedures and familiar with modern tactical systems. Of course, sir. But as she turned to leave, Harrison added something that stopped her cold. Besides, this is exactly the kind of mission that separates the wheat from the chaff. These young pilots need to prove themselves under pressure. Better they learn to handle adversity now than in a real war. Learn to handle adversity with the lives of a trapped reconnaissance team hanging in the balance. Walking back across the base under a sky full of stars, Ava felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. The familiar knot of anticipation in her stomach that came before a mission. The same feeling she'd had the night before Valkyrie, when she'd known something was wrong, but hadn't been able to convince anyone to listen. History, it seemed, was about to repeat itself. The mission briefing began at 0500 hours with the kind of military precision that masked underlying chaos. Ava sat in the back row of the briefing room, officially there as an observer, but really present because Captain Parker had requested her attendance for educational purposes. Colonel Harrison stood at the front of the room beside a large tactical display showing Dagger Canyon in brutal detail. The terrain looked like something carved by an angry god. Jagged peaks, narrow valleys, and enough dead zones to swallow. Aircraft hole. Reconnaissance Team Bravo 7 was conducting surveillance on suspected enemy installations when they went dark. Harrison began. Satellite imagery suggests they're trapped approximately 40 clicks into the canyon system. Here. He pointed to a red dot surrounded by hostile indicators. Lieutenant Webb raised his hand. Sir, what's the current enemy presence in the target zone? Intel suggests moderate resistance, but the primary challenge will be terrain and weather. The canyon creates unique atmospheric conditions that can interfere with standard navigation systems. Ava's jaw tightened. Interfere was putting it mildly. The canyon was a natural electromagnetic maze that could turn the most sophisticated instruments into expensive paperweights. She'd tried to explain this to Harrison privately the night before, but he dismissed her concerns, outdated pessimism. Mission timeline is critical, Harrison continued. Weather window closes at 1,400 hours. After that, we're looking at 3 days of severe storm activity. If we don't extract the team today, they're on their own until conditions improve. 3 days. In hostile territory, with limited supplies and unknown injuries. Ava had seen what 3 days could do to stranded soldiers. The lucky ones didn't survive to be rescued. Flight path has been optimized for speed and efficiency, Lieutenant Colonel Walsh announced, activating a holographic route display. The projected path cut straight through Sector 7, just as Ava had feared. Direct approach through the canyon mouth, following the valley floor to the extraction point. The route looked perfect on paper. Clean, direct, efficient. It was also exactly the kind of path that weather systems love to turn into death. Traps. Ava cleared her throat. Excuse me, sir. I've reviewed the meteorological data for Sector 7, and there's a significant low-pressure system. Major Remy. Harrison interrupted without looking in her direction. Your concerns have been noted and evaluated. Our weather analysis team has determined that current aircraft systems are more than capable of handling any atmospheric conditions we might encounter. Murmurs of agreement from the volunteer pilots. To them, she was the paranoid old-timer who saw disasters lurking behind every cloud formation. Sir, with respect, the pressure gradients in that system are similar to conditions that can cause complete instrumentation failure. I've experienced major. Harrison's voice carried the kind of authority that ended discussions. These pilots are flying state-of-the-art aircraft with triple redundant navigation systems. Your experiences with older equipment aren't relevant to current operational capabilities. The room fell silent except for the hum of electronic displays. 10 young pilots sat at attention, absolute confidence radiating from their posture. They believed in their training, their technology, their invincibility. Ava had believed in those same things once. Very well, sir, she said quietly, settling back into her chair. The technical briefing continued with discussions of approach vectors, communication protocols, and extraction procedures. Everything was planned to the minute. coordinated with surgical precision, backed up by the most advanced technology the military could provide. It was a perfect plan that would work flawlessly, right up until it didn't. After the briefing, Ava approached Lieutenant Webb near the preparation rooms. The young pilot was reviewing mission parameters on his tablet, stylus dancing across the screen as he made notes. "Lieutenant, could I have a word?" Webb looked up, barely concealing his impatience. "What can I do for you, Major?" "I've flown missions in similar terrain. The atmospheric conditions in Dagger Canyon can be unpredictable. If your instruments fail, if GPS goes down, do you know how to navigate by Dead Reckoning?" Webb's expression shifted from impatience to something approaching condescension. "Major, respectfully, when would that ever be necessary? Our aircraft have backup systems for the backup systems. Complete navigation failure just doesn't happen anymore. It happened to me. That was different. Older aircraft, outdated systems. The Falcon 15s are remarkable machines," Ava interrupted. "But they're still machines. And machines can fail when you need them most." Webb closed his tablet with a snap. "Major, I appreciate your concern, but we've trained extensively for this type of mission. We know our aircraft capabilities better than anyone." The dismissal stung, but it was the absolute certainty in his voice that worried her most. She'd heard that same tone before Operation Valkyrie, from pilots who believed so completely in their technology that they'd forgotten to prepare for the moment when technology wasn't enough. 30 minutes before takeoff, Ava found herself standing on the observation deck overlooking the flight line. 10 Falcon 15s sat in perfect formation, their sleek profiles gleaming in the morning sun. Ground crews moved with practiced efficiency, conducting final pre-flight checks on aircraft that represented the pinnacle of military aviation technology. Her own Falcon 12 sat alone in Hangar 7, unofficial and unnoticed. "Second thoughts about retirement?" Captain Parker approached from behind, carrying 2 cups of coffee that steamed in the cold morning air. "I'm not retired," Ava replied, accepting the offered cup gratefully. "Just reassigned." Parker nodded toward the flight line. "They're good pilots. Young, confident, well-trained. Yes, they are. But—" Ava was quiet for a long moment, watching the ground crews complete their final checks. Confidence can be a liability when you're facing something you've never encountered before. These pilots have never had their instruments fail completely. They've never had to choose between following orders and keeping their people alive. They've never— She stopped herself. Never had to fly home alone? The question hung in the air between them. Parker had read her complete service record, which meant she knew exactly what had happened during Operation Valkyrie. She knew about the 17 pilots who hadn't come home, about the impossible choices that had haunted Ava for 3 years. "I keep thinking about the weather patterns," Ava said finally. "The electromagnetic interference levels, the pressure gradients. It's also similar to Valkyrie." "Yes." They stood in silence, watching the final preparations. At exactly 0800 hours, the Falcon 15s began their engine startup sequence. The sound was magnificent. 10 perfectly tuned aircraft preparing to demonstrate American military superiority. "Major Remy, report to Colonel Harrison's office immediately." The announcement crackled over the base communication system with unusual urgency. Ava exchanged a glance with Parker, both women recognizing the tone that meant something significant had changed. Harrison's office was crowded when she arrived. The colonel sat behind his desk with his usual composed expression, but Lieutenant Colonel Walsh stood beside him looking distinctly uncomfortable. Most unusually, Brigadier General Patricia Stone was present, her star gleaming on her uniform collar. "Major Remy," General Stone said without preamble, "we've received updated intelligence regarding the extraction mission. The situation is more complex than initially reported. Ava remained at attention, waiting for details. Reconnaissance Team Bravo 7 wasn't just conducting surveillance, Walsh continued. They were investigating reports of advanced enemy air defense systems in the canyon. Systems specifically designed to interfere with modern aircraft navigation and communication equipment. The knot in Ava's stomach tightened. What kind of interference, sir? Electromagnetic pulse weapons, signal jammers, possibly even weather manipulation technology, General Stone replied. The kind of systems that could turn our most advanced aircraft into expensive gliders. Harrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair. General, surely our redundant systems. Colonel, Stone interrupted. 3 hours ago, a reconnaissance drone equipped with the same navigation systems as our Falcon 15s was sent into Dagger Canyon. We lost contact immediately. When we recovered the wreckage, every electronic component had been fried. Silence filled the room like smoke from a crash site. Major Remy, General Stone continued, your service record indicates extensive experience with manual navigation and emergency procedures. Have you ever successfully completed an extraction mission with complete instrumentation failure? Yes, ma'am. Operation Valkyrie, 2011. Stone nodded. I've read the classified report. You navigated 40 miles through an electromagnetic storm, using compass and dead reckoning, extracting 6 wounded soldiers from a hostile zone after your entire squadron was either shot down or disabled by equipment failure. Yes, ma'am. The mission is a go in 20 minutes, Stone said, but I'm making one change to the roster. Major Remy, you're taking Lieutenant Rodriguez's position as backup flight leader. The room erupted in controlled chaos. Harrison leaned forward in his chair, his composed expression finally cracking. General, with respect, Major Remy hasn't flown operational missions in 3 years. Her aircraft is a decade older than the rest of the squadron. This could compromise. Colonel, Stone's voice cut like a blade. We have a team of American soldiers trapped in hostile territory, facing enemies equipped with technology specifically designed to neutralize our advantages. I want a pilot who can bring them home when everything else fails. She turned to Ava. Major, you have 15 minutes to prepare. Take whatever equipment you think you'll need. As the general left, Harrison stood slowly behind his desk. His face was flushed with barely controlled anger. Major, let me be clear about something. You are backup flight leader only. Lieutenant Webb maintains operational command. Your job is to follow orders and provide support if needed. Nothing more. Understood, sir. But as Ava hurried toward Hangar 7, she knew that orders and reality had a way of diverging when aircraft started falling out of the sky. Her Falcon 12 was already being prepped by Technical Sergeant Martinez, who had somehow anticipated this moment. The aircraft looked ancient compared to the sleek Falcon 15s, but every system had been meticulously maintained and upgraded within the constraints of the aging airframe. Thought you might need this today, Martinez said, handing her the small metal box that contained her hand-drawn map. I took the liberty of updating your fuel load and checking the manual navigation instruments. Everything's calibrated and ready. Ava strapped herself into the familiar cockpit, muscle memory guiding her through the pre-flight sequence. Around her, the Falcon 12's analog gauges and mechanical systems hummed with reliable simplicity. No holographic displays, no computer-generated flight paths, no artificial intelligence to make decisions for her. Just a pilot, an aircraft, and the kind of hard-earned experience that couldn't be programmed or simulated. On the radio, she could hear the Falcon 15 pilots conducting their final communications checks. Their voices carried the confidence of youth and the certainty of superior technology. Blackfire Control, this is Alpha Leader requesting permission for takeoff. Alpha Leader, you are cleared for departure. Weather conditions optimal, visibility Unlimited. Optimal conditions. Ava glanced at her manual barometric pressure gauge and frowned. The needle was dropping faster than the official weather reports indicated. Blackfire Control. This is backup leader requesting updated meteorological data for Sector 7. Backup leader, conditions remain within acceptable parameters. Maintain formation and follow Alpha leader's navigation. Acceptable parameters. Ava opened her metal box and pulled out the faded map, comparing her hand-drawn route to the official flight path displayed on her basic GPS unit. The computer wanted to take them straight through the heart of the developing storm system. Her map suggested a longer, more complex route that would add 15 minutes to the flight time, but avoid the worst electromagnetic interference. All units, prepare for takeoff. Lieutenant Webb's voice crackled over the radio with absolute authority. Ava took a deep breath and pushed the throttle forward. Her Falcon 12 rolled down the runway, older and slower than the rest of the formation, but carrying something the other aircraft lacked, a pilot who knew what it felt like when everything went wrong at once. As the mountains of Dagger Canyon rose ahead of them like the teeth of some enormous predator, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was flying into history, the same history that had killed 17 of her friends and nearly killed her. But this time, she was ready for it. 23 minutes into the flight, reality began to unravel. Alpha Leader, I'm showing some interference on my navigation display. Lieutenant Martinez's voice crackled over the radio with the first hint of uncertainty. Ava checked her position on the hand-drawn map, then glanced at her analog compass. They were approaching the outer edge of Sector 7, exactly where her calculations had predicted the electromagnetic interference would begin. Her Falcon 12's older systems were largely mechanical, immune to the electronic warfare capabilities that turn modern aircraft into expensive paperweights. Alpha 2, confirm interference, Lieutenant Webb responded, his voice still carrying command authority, but lacking its earlier absolute confidence. Intermittent signal loss on GPS, some static on communication channels, came the reply. Ava keyed her radio. Alpha Leader, this is Backup Leader. Recommend immediate course correction to bearing 270 to avoid the worst interference. Zone, negative, Backup Leader. Mission parameters require direct approach through current heading. Our systems are designed to handle minor electronic interference. Minor interference. Ava watched her compass needle swing as they flew deeper into the electromagnetic chaos surrounding Dagger Canyon. The storm system she'd tried to warn them about was intensifying exactly as her experience had predicted. Alpha Leader, I'm losing. GPS lock, another voice reported. Alpha 4, same here. Navigation computer is cycling through startup sequences. All units maintain visual formation, Webb ordered. We'll navigate by landmarks until we clear the interference zone. Visual formation. In terrain where peaks disappeared into cloud cover and valleys looked identical from altitude. Ava pulled out her binoculars and studied the approaching canyon system, comparing what she saw to the detailed topographical features marked on her hand-drawn map. Alpha Leader, I've flown this terrain before. The canyon system creates natural electromagnetic dead zones that can persist for miles. Recommend we circle around to approach from Backup Leader. Maintain radio silence unless emergency conditions exist. Webb's dismissal stung, but Ava bit back her response. She'd learned during Operation Valkyrie that pride was a luxury that got people killed. Her job wasn't to be right. It was to bring everyone home alive. The first aircraft went down at 0847 hours. Mayday, Mayday. This is Alpha 5. Complete system failure. Instruments are dark. I'm flying blind. Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice carried the sharp edge of panic that came when technology failed. At the worst possible moment. Alpha 5, can you maintain visual reference? Webb's command authority was beginning to crack. Negative, Alpha Leader. I'm in cloud cover. No visual on terrain or formation. My compass is spinning. Altimeter is showing impossible readings. Ava keyed her radio immediately. Alpha 5, this is backup leader. I have you on visual. Come to heading 310. Decrease altitude to 7,000 feet. You'll break cloud cover in approximately 90 seconds. Backup leader, negative. Alpha 5, maintain current heading, and the transmission ended in a burst of static. On her radio display, Alpha 5's signal disappeared completely. Alpha Leader, Alpha 5 is off the grid, came a shaky voice from Alpha 6. All units, maintain formation and continue to extraction point, Webb ordered. But the confidence was gone from his voice, replaced by the kind of forced calm that meant someone was fighting panic. Ava checked her position against the map again. They were flying directly into the heart of the electromagnetic storm, exactly where her hand-drawn route had indicated they should never go. Her Falcon 12's mechanical systems continued to function normally, but the radio chatter from the Falcon 15s indicated their advanced electronics were failing systematically. Alpha Leader, I'm showing multiple system warnings, reported Alpha 3. Same here. Navigation computer just crashed completely. My targeting system is cycling through error messages. One by one, the most advanced aircraft in the American military were being reduced to little more than expensive gliders by an electromagnetic phenomenon that meteorology textbooks said shouldn't exist. All units, this is Alpha Leader. We're aborting the mission and returning to base immediately. Alpha Leader, what about the extraction team? This came from Alpha 7, Lieutenant Parker, who had apparently maintained some communication capability. We can't help them if we can't navigate. All units, come to heading 180 and climb to 15,000 feet. But as the formation attempted to execute the abort maneuver, the electromagnetic interference intensified. Aircraft that had been flying in perfect formation suddenly found themselves scattered across dozens of miles of hostile airspace, their pilots struggling with instruments that provided contradictory information or no information at all. Alpha Leader, I can't find the formation. Where's everyone? Alpha 6, I'm showing you 15 miles off course, but that can't be right. This is Alpha 8. My fuel gauge is reading empty, but I took off with full tanks 30 minutes ago. The radio dissolved into a chaos of panicked voices and conflicting reports. Sophisticated aircraft that had performed flawlessly in simulation were failing catastrophically in real-world conditions their designers had never anticipated. Ava flew steady and straight, using her compass, altimeter, and the terrain features marked on her faded map to maintain course toward the extraction point. Her Falcon 12 wasn't the fastest or most advanced aircraft in the formation, but it was the only one still flying with reliable navigation. All units, this is backup leader. She transmitted calmly. I have visual on the extraction zone. The reconnaissance team is alive and signaling from coordinates marked on my display. Static answered her. All units, please respond. This is backup leader. More static, punctuated by occasional fragments of panicked transmissions. ... completely. Lost ... double quotes. ... instruments are showing ... can single find the... Ava was alone again, just like Operation Valkyrie. 9 aircraft with superior technology had been defeated by the same electromagnetic phenomena that had claimed 17 of her squadron mates 3 years earlier. The difference was that this time, she was prepared. Banking left toward the extraction coordinates, Ava spotted movement below. The reconnaissance team was alive and attempting to signal with mirrors and colored panels. But the landing zone was worse than anything described in the mission briefing. Jagged rocks, unstable terrain, and barely enough flat space for an aircraft half the size of her Falcon 12. Bravo 7, this is backup leader. I have visual on your position. Prepare for immediate extraction. Her radio crackled with a weak response. Backup leader ... team leader here. 3 wounded ... under sporadic fire. Can't hold position much longer. Ava circled the landing zone, studying the approach vectors with the kind of tactical analysis that came from years of impossible extractions. The wind patterns were treacherous, funneled through the canyon walls in unpredictable gusts that could slam an aircraft into the rocks without warning. But she'd landed in worse conditions during Valkyrie, when desperation had been the only navigation aid that mattered. Bravo 7, I'm coming in. Mark your position with smoke if you have it. The approach required everything she'd learned about flying in conditions that shouldn't be survivable. No computer assistance, no automated landing systems, just pilot instinct and the kind of experience that came from surviving what others didn't. Her Falcon 12 dropped toward the canyon floor like a controlled crash, wind shear threatening to tear the aircraft apart, while Ava fought to maintain approach speed. At 50 feet above the deck, enemy fire erupted from concealed positions in the canyon walls, muzzle flashes that lit up the shadows like deadly fireflies. Bullets punched through her wing panels, sending hydraulic fluid streaming behind the aircraft in thin trails of silver. Warning lights blazed across her instrument panel like a Christmas tree, but the engine continued to run strong, and the controls responded to her touch. 30 seconds, she shouted into her radio as the aircraft settled toward the improvised landing zone. The Falcon 12 hit the ground hard, bouncing twice before settling on terrain that looked like the surface of an alien planet. Before the engines had fully spooled down, Ava was out of the cockpit and running toward the reconnaissance team's position. 6 soldiers in various states of injury and exhaustion were taking cover behind a cluster of boulders. Their team leader, a grizzled sergeant with blood seeping through a field dressing on his arm, looked at her with the kind of amazement usually reserved for miracles. "You're the pilot from the radio?" "That's right, Sergeant. Let's get your people home." Loading the wounded soldiers into her cargo bay required every bit of space available in the aging aircraft. The reconnaissance team had been carrying sensitive equipment that couldn't be left behind, adding weight that pushed her Falcon 12 beyond its recommended operational limits. "Ma'am," the sergeant said as they prepared for takeoff, "we heard the other aircraft go down. Are you sure this old bird can get us out of here?" Ava looked at her battered Falcon 12, wings punctured by enemy fire, hydraulic fluid leaking from multiple hits, warning lights indicating system failures throughout the aircraft. By any reasonable standard, attempting takeoff was suicide. "Sergeant," she replied, "this old bird has gotten me out of worse situations than this." The takeoff was a controlled disaster. Overloaded and damaged, the Falcon 12 struggled to achieve lift in the thin mountain air, while enemy fire continued to rake the canyon floor. Ava pushed the throttles beyond their redline limits, coaxing every ounce of performance from an aircraft that should have been in a museum. But as they climbed away from the extraction zone, she heard something that made every risk worthwhile. The sound of wounded soldiers laughing with relief, knowing they were going home. The flight back to Blackfire Base was a masterclass in flying damaged aircraft through impossible conditions. With multiple system failures and limited fuel, Ava had to navigate by dead reckoning, while avoiding the electromagnetic interference zones that had claimed the rest of her squadron. Her hand-drawn map proved invaluable, showing the safe corridors through the mountains that her instruments couldn't detect. Every landmark was exactly where her faded ink had marked it. Every wind pattern behaved according to the notes she'd scribbled in the margins during her first flight through this terrain. "Blackfire Control, this is backup leader requesting immediate medical assistance. 7 souls on board, 3 requiring urgent care. The response came immediately, filled with barely controlled emotion. Backup leader, confirm your position. We show no other aircraft from your mission returning. Blackfire control, I'm 15 miles out on final approach. The extraction was successful, but I need emergency vehicles standing by. As her Falcon? 12 limped toward the runway. Ava could see fire trucks and ambulances positioning themselves for her landing. The entire base seemed to be watching as the only aircraft to return from the mission approached through smoke and damaged systems. The landing was harder than she would have preferred, but her aircraft held together long enough to get everyone home alive. As the wounded soldiers were transferred to waiting medical teams, Ava remained in her cockpit for a moment, hands shaking slightly from adrenaline and exhaustion. She'd done it again. Brought everyone home when technology failed, and superior equipment became worthless metal. But this time, the victory felt different. This time, people had seen what happened when experience trumped innovation, when the old ways proved to be the only ways that actually worked. Colonel Harrison arrived at her aircraft within minutes, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Behind him came General Stone, whose expression was entirely unreadable. Major Remy, Harrison began, I need a full debrief on what happened out there. The electromagnetic interference was more severe than anticipated, Ava replied, climbing down from her cockpit. The Falcon 15's electronic systems were overwhelmed, but mechanical navigation remained functional. General Stone stepped forward. Major, are you saying that our most advanced aircraft were defeated by weather? No, ma'am. They were defeated by over-reliance on technology that wasn't designed to operate in those specific electromagnetic conditions. The aircraft themselves are excellent machines, but their pilots weren't prepared for complete instrumentation failure. The general nodded slowly. And you were prepared? Ava pulled out her metal box, opening it to reveal the hand-drawn map that had guided her through impossible terrain twice in 3 years. The ink was more faded now, stained with hydraulic fluid from today's mission, but every line remained accurate. Yes, ma'am. I was prepared. The debriefing room fell silent as Ava finished her detailed account of the mission. General Stone sat at the head of the conference table, surrounded by colonels, intelligence officers, and technical analysts who had spent the past 4 hours trying to understand how 9 advanced aircraft had been lost while 1 obsolete Falcon 12 had completed the mission successfully. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Major, General Stone said, reviewing her notes. The Falcon 15s experienced complete navigation failure due to electromagnetic interference that your aircraft was able to withstand. Not withstand. Ma'am, work around. The Falcon 12's older systems are largely mechanical and analog, which made them less susceptible to electronic warfare measures. But the primary factor was navigation methodology. Colonel Harrison shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Major, are you suggesting that our tactical planning was inadequate? Ava pulled out her metal box and spread the hand-drawn map on the conference table. To the assembled officers, it looked like something from a museum. Faded ink, worn edges, actual sand grains embedded in the paper from Operation Valkyrie. Sir, this map shows terrain features and atmospheric conditions that don't appear in digital databases. Weather patterns that change seasonally, electromagnetic dead zones that shift based on solar activity, wind currents that can turn predictable flight paths into death traps. Captain Parker, who had been quietly taking notes throughout the debriefing, leaned forward. Major, how did you acquire this level of detailed terrain knowledge? The question hung in the air like smoke from a crash site. Ava traced one of the flight paths with her finger, remembering the desperate navigation that had brought her home from Operation Valkyrie. Experience, Captain. 3 years ago, I flew through this same terrain when my squadron was hit by similar electromagnetic interference. 17 aircraft went down, but I managed to navigate home using manual methods when all electronic systems failed. And you documented these navigation routes? I documented everything. Every landmark, every wind pattern, every electromagnetic anomaly I encountered. I knew that someday, someone else might need this information. General Stone studied the map intently. Major, this level of detail ... This isn't standard military cartography. This looks like the work of someone who expected to fly this terrain. Again, yes, ma'am. After Valkyrie, I studied these mountains extensively. I knew the military would eventually return to this region, and I wanted to be prepared. Lieutenant Colonel Walsh, who had been silent throughout most of the debriefing, finally spoke. Major Remy, are you saying that you've been maintaining this intelligence database on your own initiative for 3 years? Yes, sir. While assigned to instructor duty? Yes, sir. The room fell quiet as the implications sank in. For 3 years, while the base's leadership had dismissed her as an outdated relic, Ava had been quietly preparing for exactly the kind of mission that had just claimed 9 aircraft. General, Colonel Harrison interjected, I think we need to focus on the immediate tactical situation. We have 9 missing pilots and... Colonel, General Stone interrupted. We have 9 pilots missing because our tactical planning failed to account for conditions that Major Remy predicted and prepared for. I want to understand how that happened. Captain Parker opened a thick folder filled with meteorological data. Ma'am, I've been reviewing the weather analysis that supported the original mission planning. The electromagnetic interference levels we encountered today were 3 times higher than our computer models predicted. But Major Remy's analysis was accurate? Her hand-drawn notes show electromagnetic patterns that match exactly what we experienced in the field. She predicted the interference zones, the intensity levels, even the specific altitudes where systems would fail. Colonel Harrison's face was flushed with barely controlled anger. With respect, General, we can't base military planning on hand-drawn maps and anecdotal experience. We have sophisticated computer models, satellite data, real-time intelligence feeds, all of which failed catastrophically today, General Stone replied coldly. While Major Remy's anecdotal experience enabled her to complete the mission successfully, the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Ava remained silent, letting the facts speak for themselves. She'd learned during operation Valkyrie that defending yourself too vigorously often made you look guilty of the accusations being made. Major, General Stone continued, I want you to walk me through your decision-making process during the mission. When did you realize the other aircraft were in trouble? Approximately 23 minutes into the flight, when we entered the outer edge of the electromagnetic interference zone. The Falcon 15's GPS systems began failing in exactly the pattern I had experienced during Valkyrie. And your response? I recommended immediate course correction to avoid the worst interference, but operational command was maintained by Lieutenant Webb as per mission parameters. Colonel Harrison leaned forward aggressively. Major, are you criticizing Lieutenant Webb's command decisions? Ava met his gaze steadily. No, sir. Lieutenant Webb followed the mission plan exactly as briefed. The fault wasn't in the execution. It was in the planning assumptions. What do you mean? The mission plan assumed that modern aircraft systems would be sufficient to handle any environmental conditions we might encounter. That assumption proved incorrect. Captain Parker consulted her notes. Major, during your pre-mission briefings, did you attempt to share your terrain knowledge with the other pilots? Yes, Captain. I recommended alternative flight paths and suggested the pilots prepare for manual navigation in case of system failure. And the response? Ava glanced at Colonel Harrison before answering. The recommendations were noted, but not incorporated into the official mission plan. The pilots were confident that their training and equipment would be sufficient. General Stone's expression was unreadable. "Major, in your professional opinion, could today's losses have been prevented?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Ava knew that her answer would determine not just her own future, but potentially the careers of everyone in the room. "Yes, ma'am. If the mission plan had incorporated alternative navigation methods and avoided the most severe electromagnetic interference zones, all aircraft could have reached the extraction point safely. Based on information that you possessed but was not included in the official briefing." "Yes, ma'am." Colonel Harrison stood abruptly. "General, I object to this line of questioning. Major Remy is essentially claiming that her personal theories should have overridden established military planning procedures. We can't run operations based on the hunches of individual pilots." "Colonel," General Stone replied, "Major Remy's hunches resulted in a successful extraction while our established procedures resulted in 9 lost aircraft. I'm beginning to think we need to reconsider which approach is more reliable." The meeting continued for another 2 hours, with technical experts analyzing every aspect of the mission failure. But the core issue remained simple. Experience had triumphed over technology, and the military's most sophisticated aircraft had been defeated by conditions that one pilot with a hand-drawn map had navigated successfully. As the debriefing finally concluded, General Stone approached Ava privately. "Major, I'm recommending you for immediate restoration to active flight status. We need pilots who can operate when everything else fails." "Thank you, ma'am, but I need to ask you something directly. Why didn't you fight harder to get your intelligence included in the mission planning?" Ava was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "General, I've learned that sometimes people need to see failure before they're willing to consider alternatives. I hoped I was wrong about the conditions we've encountered today." "But you knew you weren't wrong." "Yes, ma'am, I knew." That evening, word spread quickly through Blackfire Base about the day's events. The impossible had happened. The forgotten instructor had succeeded where the elite squadron had failed. Pilots who had dismissed her as outdated were now quietly asking technical questions about manual navigation and dead reckoning. Ava found herself in Hangar 7, performing post-flight maintenance on her battered Falcon 12. The aircraft looked like it had been through a war, with bullet holes, hydraulic leaks, and system damage that would require weeks to repair properly. But it had brought everyone home. Technical Sergeant Martinez approached with a cup of coffee and a satisfied expression. "Heard you had an interesting day, Major. You could say that. Also heard that some people are finally starting to ask the right questions about why our most advanced aircraft couldn't handle what your old bird took in stride." Ava accepted the coffee gratefully. "Technology is only as good as the people who understand its limitations, Sergeant. Today, we learned that our limitations were more severe than anyone wanted to admit." As she worked on her aircraft, Ava reflected on the day's events. 9 pilots were missing, possibly dead, because the military had chosen to trust computers over experience. But 6 soldiers were alive, because one pilot had remembered that the old ways sometimes worked when the new ways failed. The victory felt hollow, but it was a victory nonetheless. And for the first time in 3 years, people were finally ready to listen to what she had been trying to tell them. The emergency meeting convened at 0600 hours sharp, 12 hours after Ava's successful return from Dagger Canyon. General Stone had flown in from Pentagon Command overnight, bringing with her a team of investigators whose presence suggested that today's events would have consequences far beyond Blackfire Base. Ava sat in the conference room's front row, still wearing her flight suit from the previous day's mission. Around her, the atmosphere was tense with the kind of energy that preceded major changes in military policy. Colonel Harrison sat across the table, his face a mask of professional composure that couldn't quite hide his underlying anxiety. "Ladies and gentlemen, General Stone began. We're here to conduct a comprehensive review of yesterday's mission failure and to address systemic issues in our tactical planning procedures. The phrase systemic issues carried weight in military circles. It meant that someone's career was about to end, and fingers were pointing in multiple directions. Major Remy, Stone continued, please provide the investigation team with a complete tactical analysis of the electromagnetic interference patterns you encountered. Ava opened her metal box and spread her hand-drawn map on the conference table. To the assembled investigators, the faded document looked like an artifact from a bygone era, which, in many ways, it was. The interference began at approximately these coordinates, she said, pointing to a section marked with careful notations. Intensity increased exponentially as we approached the canyon system, reaching levels that overwhelmed modern navigation computers but were consistent with patterns I documented during Operation Valkyrie. Brigadier General Marcus Thompson, one of Stone's investigators, leaned forward to examine the map more closely. Major, this level of detail ... When did you create this documentation? The original mapping was completed in 2011, sir. I've been updating it quarterly based on seasonal weather patterns and solar activity data. You've been maintaining independent intelligence files for 3 years? Yes, sir. Colonel Harrison cleared his throat. General Thompson, I should point out that Major Remy's personal research project was conducted without official approval or oversight. These documents haven't been validated by our intelligence analysts. The implication was clear. Ava had been operating outside established protocols, conducting unauthorized intelligence gathering that could potentially compromise operational security. Colonel, General Stone replied icily, Major Remy's unauthorized intelligence proved more accurate than our official analysis. Perhaps we should be asking why our established systems failed so completely. Captain Parker, who had been reviewing technical data at the back of the room, approached with a thick folder. General, I've completed a comparative analysis of Major Remy's terrain documentation versus our official intelligence databases. Your findings? The data is not only accurate, it's more comprehensive than anything in our current systems. She identified electromagnetic anomalies, seasonal weather patterns, and terrain features that don't appear in any official military cartography. Colonel Harrison's expression darkened. Captain, are you suggesting that Major Remy's personal files are more reliable than Pentagon-approved intelligence databases? I'm suggesting that her files contain critical information that doesn't exist anywhere else in our intelligence network. The room fell silent as the implication settled. For 3 years, while the military had invested billions in sophisticated intelligence gathering systems, one dismissed pilot had been quietly assembling more accurate tactical information, using nothing but personal observation and careful documentation. Major Remy, General Thompson said, I need to understand your methodology. How did you acquire intelligence data that our official systems missed? Ava chose her words carefully. Sir, I spent extensive time studying this terrain after Operation Valkyrie because I knew the military would return here eventually. I used personal leave time to conduct observational flights, correlated weather data with electromagnetic readings, and documented patterns that weren't captured in standard reconnaissance reports. Personal leave time? Yes, sir. I used my own aircraft and fuel to conduct intelligence gathering that I believed would be valuable for future operations. The investigators exchanged glances. What Ava was describing went far beyond normal. Pilot dedication. It bordered on obsession with a level of detail that professional intelligence analysts had missed. Major, Colonel Harrison interjected. Did you attempt to share this intelligence with appropriate command authorities? The question was a trap, and everyone in the room knew it. If Ava said yes, Harrison could argue that proper channels had been followed and the intelligence had been rejected for valid reasons. If she said no, he could claim she had been deliberately withholding critical information. Sir, I made several attempts to brief command staff on terrain conditions in the Dagger Canyon region. These briefings were noted, but not incorporated into operational planning. Why not? Ava glanced around the room, seeing career military officers who had built their reputations on following established procedures and trusting institutional systems. Because my recommendations were based on personal experience rather than official intelligence sources. Command preferred to rely on computer models and satellite data. General Stone leaned forward. Major, in your opinion, why did our official intelligence fail to identify the electromagnetic conditions that brought down 9 aircraft? Another loaded question. Ava's answer would either validate the military's intelligence-gathering methods or expose fundamental flaws in billion-dollar systems. Ma'am, official intelligence focuses on broad regional patterns using satellite data and computer modeling. These methods are excellent for strategic planning, but can miss localized phenomena that require direct observation to detect, such as the electromagnetic anomalies you documented. Yes, ma'am. The interference patterns in Dagger Canyon are caused by unique geological formations interacting with solar radiation. This creates electromagnetic dead zones that shift seasonally and can't be predicted by standard meteorological models. General Thompson consulted his notes. Major, you're describing conditions that would require years of direct observation to map accurately. How long have you been studying this region? 3 years, sir. And during this time, you've been officially assigned to instructor duty? Yes, sir. Colonel Harrison saw his opening. General, I think we need to address the elephant in the room. Major Remy has been conducting unauthorized intelligence operations while assigned to non-operational duties. This raises serious questions about proper chain of command and operational security. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a crash site. Harrison was suggesting that Ava had been operating as a rogue agent, conducting unauthorized reconnaissance that could potentially compromise military operations. Colonel, General Stone replied, Major Remy's unauthorized operations consisted of using personal time to study terrain that subsequently proved critical to mission success. Are you seriously suggesting that was improper? I'm suggesting that we have established procedures for intelligence gathering and operational planning. When individual officers decide to operate outside these procedures, it creates risks that could compromise larger operations. Ava remained silent, letting Harrison dig his own grave. She'd learned during Operation Valkyrie that sometimes the best defense was allowing your opponents to reveal their priorities. Major Remy, General Thompson said, did you ever consider submitting your intelligence findings through official channels? I made several attempts, sir. However, my reports were consistently rejected because they contradicted established intelligence assessments. Rejected by whom? Ava glanced at Colonel Harrison. By base command, sir. The room fell silent, except for the scratch of pens as investigators made notes. Harrison's face was flushed with barely controlled anger, but he couldn't deny the facts without lying to Pentagon investigators. Captain Parker approached with another folder. General, I've reviewed Major Remy's attempted briefings over the past 3 years. She submitted 14 separate reports regarding electromagnetic anomalies in the Dagger Canyon region. All were rejected with notations that they contradicted official intelligence assessments. 14 reports? Yes, ma'am. Each one predicted the exact conditions that caused yesterday's mission failure. General Stone's expression was unreadable. Colonel Harrison, why were these reports rejected? Harrison shifted uncomfortably. General, we received numerous reports from various sources. We can't incorporate every individual pilot's theories into operational planning without proper validation through official channels. even when those theories prove accurate. General, we had no way of knowing they would prove accurate at the time. It was the wrong answer, and everyone in the room knew it. Harrison had essentially admitted that the military had chosen to ignore accurate intelligence because it came from the wrong source. Major Remy, General Stone said, if you had been included in yesterday's mission planning, could the aircraft losses have been prevented? Yes, ma'am. The electromagnetic interference zones I documented could have been avoided with alternative flight paths that would have added only 12 minutes to the mission timeline. 12 minutes. Yes, ma'am. General Thompson leaned back in his chair. So we lost 9 aircraft and pilots to save 12 minutes of flight time? The question echoed through the conference room like a gunshot. 9 families would be grieving because the military had chosen efficiency over experience, technology over wisdom. Major, General Stone continued, I want your professional assessment. How many of our current operational plans might be based on similar intelligence failures? It was the question that would change everything. Ava knew that her answer would either validate decades of military planning or expose systematic flaws that could affect operations worldwide. General, any operation that relies exclusively on satellite intelligence and computer modeling without incorporating direct observational data could face similar challenges. Modern systems are excellent for most conditions, but they have blind spots that can only be identified through field experience. Blind spots that could prove fatal? Yes, ma'am. The meeting continued for another 3 hours with investigators, probing every aspect of the intelligence failure that had cost 9 aircraft. But the fundamental issue was already clear. The military's most sophisticated systems had been defeated by conditions that one dismissed pilot had predicted and prepared. As the session concluded, Colonel Harrison approached Ava with an expression that mixed anger and desperation. Major, I hope you understand the implications of what you've done here today. You've essentially accused this entire command structure of incompetence. Ava met his gaze steadily. No, sir. I've simply provided accurate information about operational conditions that prove critical to mission success. Information that you gathered through unauthorized means. Information that could have saved 9 pilots if it had been incorporated into mission planning. Harrison's face flushed with anger. Major, your career at this base is finished. I'll make sure you never fly operational missions again. It was a threat, pure and simple. But as Ava looked around the conference room at investigators who were documenting systematic intelligence failures, she realized that Harrison's threats might be empty. For the first time in 3 years, the truth was finally being heard by people who had the authority to act on it. The question was whether that truth had come too late to save the 9 pilots who were still missing in Dagger Canyon. The courtroom at Blackfire Base was packed beyond capacity. What had begun as a routine investigation into mission failures had evolved into a formal military tribunal that would determine the future of tactical planning procedures across the entire Air Force. Ava sat at the witness table, wearing her dress blues with the ribbons that told the story of her military career. Across the room, Colonel Harrison was flanked by Pentagon lawyers whose presence suggested that this hearing would have implications far beyond one base commander's decisions. General Stone served as the presiding officer, supported by a panel of senior military officials who had flown in from Washington. The atmosphere was tense with the kind of energy that preceded major changes in military policy. This tribunal is convened to investigate intelligence failures related to the Dagger Canyon mission of December 15th, General Stone announced. We will examine systematic issues in operational planning that resulted in the loss of 9 aircraft and pilots. The phrase systematic issues carried weight that everyone in the room understood. Careers would end today, and institutional procedures would be questioned at the highest levels. Major Remy, the general continued, please provide your complete testimony regarding the intelligence you attempted to share with Base Command over the past 3 years. Ava opened her metal box and carefully removed the hand-drawn map that had become the centerpiece of the investigation. The faded document looked impossibly fragile under the harsh courtroom lights, but its accuracy had been validated by Pentagon analysts who had spent weeks comparing her notations to satellite data. General, beginning in 2012, I submitted quarterly reports documenting electromagnetic anomalies in the Dagger Canyon region. These reports predicted the exact interference patterns that caused the mission failure on December 15th. How many reports did you submit? 17 reports over 3 years, ma'am. Each one was rejected by Base Command as inconsistent with official intelligence assessments. Colonel Harrison's lead attorney, a sharp-featured woman in navy dress, whites, stood to object. General Major Remy's so-called reports were unsupported personal theories that contradicted validated intelligence from multiple Pentagon sources. Commander Peterson, General Stone replied, Major Remy's personal theories proved more accurate than our validated intelligence. Perhaps you could explain why Pentagon sources failed to identify conditions that one pilot documented with hand-drawn maps. The question hung in the air like smoke from a crash site. Peterson had just been asked to defend the entire military intelligence establishment against the demonstrated accuracy of one pilot's personal observations. General, military planning requires validated intelligence from official sources. We cannot base operational decisions on individual theories, regardless of their eventual accuracy. It was the wrong argument to make in a room where 9 empty chairs represented the cost of ignoring accurate intelligence. Commander, General Stone said coldly, are you suggesting that accuracy is less important than following proper bureaucratic procedures? Captain Parker approached the witness table with a thick folder. General, I've prepared a comparative analysis of Major Remy's intelligence versus official Pentagon assessments for the Dagger Canyon region. Your findings? Major Remy's documentation is 97% accurate across all measurable parameters. Official intelligence assessments average 63% accuracy for the same region. The numbers echoed through the courtroom like artillery fire. The military's billion-dollar intelligence systems had been outperformed by one pilot with a compass and careful observation. Captain, Colonel Harrison's attorney interjected, how can you validate intelligence that was gathered through unauthorized methods? Parker turned to face the defense table. Commander, I validated it by comparing Major Remy's predictions to actual field conditions encountered during the December 15th mission. Her documentation predicted electromagnetic interference levels within 5% of measured values. And official intelligence predictions? Off by more than 300%. General Stone leaned forward. Major Remy, walk the tribunal through your attempt to brief Base Command before the December 15th mission. Ava consulted her notes. General, I requested permission to brief the mission planners on terrain conditions that could affect aircraft systems. Specifically, I wanted to recommend alternative flight paths that would avoid the most severe electromagnetic interference zones. And the response? Colonel Harrison informed me that my concerns had been noted, but that the mission would proceed according to established tactical planning procedures. Despite your documented experience in similar terrain? Yes, ma'am. The prosecution called Technical Sergeant Martinez as their next witness. The grizzled maintenance chief approached the stand with the kind of weathered confidence that came from 30 years of keeping aircraft airworthy. Sergeant Martinez, the prosecutor began, were you aware of Major Remy's intelligence gathering activities? Yes, sir. Major Remy would spend her personal leave time conducting observational flights over the mountain regions. She'd return with detailed notes about weather patterns, electromagnetic readings, and terrain conditions. Did you consider this unusual? Martinez smiled grimly. Sir, I considered it the sign of a pilot who understood that technology fails when you need it most. Major Remy was preparing for the missions everyone else hoped would never happen. Did Major Remy ever discuss her findings with other personnel? She tried to, sir. She'd brief anyone who would listen about the conditions in those mountains. Most folks figured she was being overly cautious. Colonel Harrison's attorney cross-examined aggressively. Sergeant, are you aware that Major Remy's activities violated regulations regarding unauthorized intelligence gathering? Martinez looked at her like she'd asked whether water was wet. Ma'am, Major Remy used her personal time and her personal aircraft to study terrain that ended up saving American lives. If that's a violation, then I guess we need better regulations. The testimony continued for 3 days, with witness after witness confirming that Ava had repeatedly attempted to share intelligence that could have prevented the mission failure. Pentagon analysts testified that her hand-drawn maps contained information that didn't exist in any official database. Flight instructors confirmed that she had been teaching manual navigation techniques that other pilots had dismissed as obsolete. The picture that emerged was devastating for Base Command. A veteran pilot with critical intelligence had been systematically ignored because her methods didn't conform to institutional preferences. On the final day of the tribunal, Colonel Harrison took the stand in his own defense. His testimony was professionally delivered, but couldn't escape the fundamental facts of the case. Colonel, the prosecutor asked, why did you reject Major Remy's intelligence reports? Because they contradicted established assessments from Pentagon intelligence sources. Military planning requires validated information from official channels. Even when that validated information proved inaccurate, we had no way of knowing it would prove inaccurate at the time. But Major Remy's reports proved accurate. Harrison's composure finally cracked. Major Remy's reports were based on personal theories and unvalidated observations. We cannot run military operations based on individual hunches. Individual hunches that save 6 soldiers' lives? That's not the point. Then, what is the point, Colonel? Harrison was quiet for a long moment, realizing that he'd been backed into a corner from which there was no escape. The point is maintaining proper chain of command and following established procedures. It was the answer that sealed his fate. In a room where 9 pilots' deaths represented the cost of following established procedures, Harrison had just admitted that he valued bureaucratic compliance over operational effectiveness. General Stone's verdict was delivered with the kind of precision that ended careers and changed institutional policies. This tribunal finds that the intelligence failures of December 15th resulted from systematic rejection of accurate tactical information due to institutional bias against non-traditional intelligence sources. The general's gaze fixed on Colonel Harrison. Colonel, your command decisions prioritize procedural compliance over operational effectiveness, resulting in preventable losses of personnel and equipment. You are hereby relieved of command and recommended for immediate retirement. Harrison's face went pale, but he remained at attention as his career dissolved around him. Major Remy, Stone continued, this tribunal finds that your intelligence-gathering activities, while technically outside established procedures, demonstrated exceptional initiative and provided critical information that prevented greater losses. You are hereby reinstated to full operational status with immediate promotion to lieutenant colonel. The courtroom erupted in applause from pilots and support personnel who had watched the proceedings. For 3 years, they had seen competence dismissed and experience ignored. Today, justice had finally been served. But Ava felt no satisfaction in Harrison's downfall. 9 pilots were still missing, and no tribunal verdict could bring them home. As she left the courtroom, General Stone approached her privately. Lieutenant Colonel Remy, I have an offer for you. Pentagon Command wants you to head a new intelligence assessment program, one that combines traditional methods with advanced technology. What would that involve, ma'am? Training pilots to think for themselves instead of trusting blindly in technology. Teaching the kind of tactical awareness that saved 6 lives in Dagger Canyon. Ava considered the offer. It would mean leaving Blackfire Base, abandoning the familiar routines of instructor duty, returning to the world of operational planning and strategic decision-making. Ma'am, I'd like to remain here at Blackfire Base. General Stone raised an eyebrow. Lieutenant Colonel, this is an opportunity to influence tactical planning at the highest levels. You could prevent intelligence failures like this from happening again. Ava looked through the courtroom windows at the flight line where young pilots were conducting training exercises. General, the best place to prevent future failures is right here, teaching the next generation of pilots that technology is a tool, not a crutch. Stone nodded slowly. Very well, Lieutenant Colonel, but I want you to establish a new training program, one that incorporates the lessons learned from December 15th. Show these young pilots what real tactical awareness looks like. As the general left, Ava remained alone in the empty courtroom, thinking about the 9 pilots who hadn't come home. Their sacrifice had finally forced the military to confront uncomfortable truths about the limitations of technology and the value of experience. She opened her metal box one last time, looking at the hand-drawn map that had become evidence in a case that changed military policy. The faded ink and worn edges told the story of preparation, persistence, and the kind of hard-earned wisdom that couldn't be programmed into computers. Tomorrow, she would begin training a new generation of pilots. But tonight, she would remember the ones who had been lost because no one wanted to listen to an old pilot with a hand-drawn map. 6 months after the tribunal, Lieutenant Colonel Ava Remy stood before a packed auditorium at Blackfire Base, addressing the largest gathering of military pilots and tactical planners in the facility's history. Word had spread throughout the Air Force about the Dagger Canyon incident and its aftermath, drawing officers from bases across the country who wanted to understand how one dismissed instructor had succeeded where the military's most advanced systems had failed. Ladies and gentlemen, Ava began, her voice carrying the authority that came from surviving what others hadn't. I want to tell you about the most important lesson I've learned in 22 years of military service. Technology will save your life right up until the moment it kills you. The auditorium was silent, except for the scratch of pens as officers took notes. Behind Ava, a large screen displayed her hand-drawn map of Dagger Canyon, alongside satellite imagery and computer-generated tactical displays. The contrast was striking. Faded ink and careful handwriting versus high-resolution digital perfection. This map, she continued, pointing to her weather documentation, contains information that doesn't exist in any Pentagon database. Not because our intelligence systems are inadequate, but because some knowledge can only be acquired through direct experience. Lieutenant Webb, who had survived the Dagger Canyon mission with minor injuries after his aircraft was recovered, 3 days later, raised his hand. Ma'am, how do we balance reliance on proven technology with the need for traditional skills? It was the question that had driven 6 months of heated debate within military leadership. How could the world's most technologically advanced Air Force incorporate lessons that seemed to contradict everything modern warfare represented? Lieutenant, the goal isn't to choose between old methods and new technology. The goal is to understand that technology amplifies human capability. It doesn't replace human judgment. Ava activated a presentation that showed comparative analysis of the December 15th mission. Your Falcon 15s are magnificent aircraft with capabilities that my old Falcon 12 can't match. But when electromagnetic interference disabled your navigation systems, you needed skills that weren't part of your standard training. Captain Rodriguez recently promoted after his own harrowing experience in Dagger Canyon, asked, "Ma'am, what specific skills should modern pilots prioritize?" Dead reckoning navigation, visual landmark identification, and most importantly, the ability to recognize when your instruments are lying to you. Ava clicked to the next slide, showing electromagnetic interference patterns. Technology fails, predictably under certain conditions. If you understand those conditions, you can prepare alternatives. The presentation continued for 2 hours, covering everything from manual navigation techniques to decision-making under uncertainty. But the core message remained simple. Preparation and experience trumped sophistication and confidence when everything went wrong simultaneously. After the formal presentation, Ava found herself surrounded by young pilots eager to learn skills their instructors had dismissed as obsolete. The irony wasn't lost on her. 6 months ago, these same pilots had considered her outdated and irrelevant. "Lieutenant Colonel," a young captain asked, "why didn't anyone teach us these techniques during flight school?" Ava considered her. Answered carefully, "Because for the past decade, our technology has been so reliable that manual skills seemed unnecessary. We forgot that the purpose of backup systems isn't to replace primary systems. It's to function when primary systems fail." Lieutenant Martinez, Technical Sergeant Martinez's daughter, who had recently graduated from flight school, approached with a question that struck to the heart of the issue. "Ma'am, how do we know when to trust our instruments and when to trust our instincts?" "Experience," Ava replied. "And until you have enough experience to make that judgment, you prepare for both possibilities." The new training program that emerged from the Dagger Canyon investigation was unlike anything in military aviation history. The REMI protocol, as pilots had begun calling it, combined cutting-edge technology with traditional navigation skills, creating pilots who could operate effectively when sophisticated systems failed. Every student learned to navigate by compass and landmark recognition. Every training flight included scenarios where electronic systems were deliberately disabled. Most importantly, every pilot learned to question their instruments when conditions suggested potential interference. The results were dramatic. Within 6 months, pilots trained under the new protocol showed significantly improved performance in adverse conditions. More importantly, they developed the kind of tactical thinking that could adapt to unexpected situations. But the real test came when Lieutenant Rodriguez led a rescue mission into hostile territory where enemy jamming had disabled GPS navigation for an entire squadron. Using techniques learned from Ava's program, he successfully navigated 12 aircraft through electromagnetic interference that would have been catastrophic 6 months earlier. All aircraft returned safely, Rodriguez reported during his debrief. Manual navigation worked exactly as Lieutenant Colonel Remy taught us. The success of the new training program attracted attention from the highest levels of military leadership. Pentagon officials, who had initially resisted changes to established procedures, were now demanding expansion of the program to bases worldwide. General Stone visited Blackfire Base to personally observe the training program that had emerged from the ashes of the December 15th disaster. She found Ava in Hangar 7, working alongside students to maintain the old Falcon 12 that had become a symbol of reliability and preparedness. "Lieutenant Colonel, I have to admit something," Stone said as they watched young pilots practice manual navigation techniques. "When I first read your service record, I thought you were a relic from an earlier era of warfare." Ava smiled, her hands covered in hydraulic fluid from replacing a worn seal. "General, maybe I am a relic. But sometimes old methods work because they've been tested by people who couldn't afford for them to fail. The Pentagon wants to expand your training program to every base in the Air Force." "That's excellent news, ma'am." Stone studied the organized chaos of students learning to navigate without computers. Lieutenant Colonel, I need to ask you something directly. Do you believe we've become too dependent on technology? Ava set down her wrench and considered. The question, General, technology isn't the problem. Overconfidence in technology is the problem. When we start believing that our systems are infallible, we stop preparing for the moment when they fail. And they will fail? Everything fails eventually, ma'am. The question is whether we're ready when it happens. That evening, Ava sat in her Falcon 12's cockpit, reading letters from families of the 9 pilots lost during the Dagger Canyon mission. Some blamed her for not fighting harder to prevent the disaster. Others thanked her for ensuring that their sons' and daughters' deaths had led to changes that would protect future pilots. The letters were difficult to read, but they reminded her why the new training program mattered. 9 families had paid the ultimate price for institutional overconfidence. Her job was to make sure their sacrifice led to meaningful change. Technical Sergeant Martinez approached with his usual cup of coffee and a satisfied expression. Heard the Pentagon wants to name the new training program after you officially. I'd prefer they name it after the 9 pilots we lost, Ava replied. Already suggested that. They're calling it the Valkyrie Protocol in honor of Operation Valkyrie and the December 15th mission. Ava nodded approvingly. The name honored both her lost squadron mates from 2011 and the 9 pilots from Dagger Canyon. It was fitting that a program designed to prevent future losses would carry the names of those who had died when preparation and experience were dismissed as unnecessary. Sergeant, do you think we've learned anything from this? Martinez laughed, but it was hollow. Ma'am, the military has a short memory for uncomfortable lessons. But maybe this time, enough people saw what happened when experience was ignored. As the months passed, the Valkyrie Protocol expanded beyond Blackfire Base to installations worldwide. Young pilots who had grown up trusting technology learned to navigate by stars and landmarks. Tactical planners who had relied exclusively on computer models began incorporating observational intelligence from experienced pilots. The changes weren't universal, and resistance remained strong among officers who had built careers on technological superiority. But the success rates spoke for themselves. Pilots trained under the new protocol performed significantly better in adverse conditions. More importantly, a generation of aviators was learning that the most sophisticated instrument in any aircraft was the trained judgment of the pilot flying it. 1 year after the Dagger Canyon incident, Ava received a letter that changed everything. It was from Lieutenant Colonel Webb, now commanding a tactical squadron in the Pacific Theater. Lieutenant Colonel Remy, the letter began, I wanted you to know that your training saved my squadron last week. We encountered electromagnetic interference that would have been catastrophic 6 months ago, but every pilot knew how to navigate manually. All aircraft returned safely. I realize now that dismissing your experience was the worst mistake of my military career. You weren't teaching outdated methods. You were teaching survival skills that our technology had made us forget we needed. The next time someone suggests that experience doesn't matter in modern warfare, I'll tell them about a pilot who saved 6 lives with a hand-drawn map and the wisdom to prepare for what everyone else thought was impossible. Ava folded the letter carefully and placed it in her metal box, alongside the faded map that had started everything. The box was fuller now, containing letters from pilots who had been saved by techniques learned at Blackfire Base, technical specifications for improved navigation systems that incorporated manual backup procedures, and commendations from Pentagon officials who had finally understood the value of combining technology with human experience. But the most important item in the box remained the original hand-drawn map from Operation Valkyrie. The ink was more faded now, stained with hydraulic fluid from multiple missions, but every line remained accurate. As she prepared for another, day of training young pilots who would carry these lessons to bases around the world. Ava reflected on the price of wisdom. 17 pilots had died in Operation Valkyrie because the military hadn't been prepared for conditions that technology couldn't handle. 9 more had been lost at Dagger Canyon because institutional arrogance had dismissed the lessons learned from that earlier tragedy. But now, hundreds of pilots were learning skills that would keep them alive when everything else failed. They were learning that confidence was valuable, but preparation was essential. They were learning that the newest technology was worthless without the judgment to use it properly. Most importantly, they were learning that sometimes the old ways were the only ways that worked, not because they were better, but because they had been tested by people who couldn't afford for them to fail. Standing on the flight line at Blackfire Base, watching a new generation of pilots practice navigation techniques that might save their lives someday, Ava finally felt that the weight of Operation Valkyrie had been lifted from her shoulders. 26 pilots had died because experience was dismissed as irrelevant. But their sacrifice had finally taught the military that the measure of a pilot wasn't in the sophistication of their equipment or the perfection of their training scores. The measure of a pilot was in their ability to bring everyone home alive when everything that could go wrong had gone wrong. And that was a lesson worth any price. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.